Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of the LeanTossup CDL podcast. We've been off for a while. I mean, we were posting stuff online, obviously, but some stuff got crossed, and some people were away from stuff, so we weren't really able to schedule time to record this podcast. But now, with stage four, week one happening, in less than 24 hours. We are here. We're joined by CDL metrics to go through and talk about those. So, Ryan, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. Yeah, I've been away from my apartment the last few days, so I've just been spending all day today catching up on all the COD news. It looks like we have a little bit to go over before we start getting into the games, but really enjoyed the end of stage four, I think, or stage three, I should say. I think for the most part, the major went pretty according to plan. And yeah, we'll see what stage four has in store for us. I'm excited.
Yeah, and a lot has happened since stage four, um, and even more has happened since the last time we talked. I think last time we were talking about Looney getting benched, and not only has that happened, but Seattle has benched Looney's replacement, or rather, Looney's replacement benched himself. Decimate decided to leave the team. That's one roster move. So Decimate joined the team. They played two games. I think it was two games. Yeah, it was two games. I think. Yeah, because there was only one on the last week and then one in the major, and they went 0-2 in those games. So Decimate decided that he had apparently more earning potential playing in Challengers Cups. So bold move there, but apparently we'll see how that works out for him. But now Decimate is gone, so Classic is joining Seattle. But the question is, well, wait, is it Classic playing on Paris? Zaptius is now playing on Paris as Classic has left. But then wait a minute, wasn't Zaptius playing for London? Well, Zaptius has been replaced on London with Afro, and then Zed has been benched in favor of Alex again, returning that back around. On the Dallas Empire side, Fellow or Felony, I'm not sure exactly how people prefer to call how he prefers to be called, but Vivid is now replacing Felony. Vivid again used to play for LAG. He was dropped earlier in the season from LAG. And then now we have also for the Minnesota Rocker, Accuracy has been benched. In his place, Major Maniac's coming back off the bench to hopefully do better, and I'd assume the main AR role. I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure if Major Maniac's going to play more of a flex and let Priesta play the AR. I'm not sure how they're going to do that. So that'd be kind of interesting to see what they do. I think we see them in a couple of days. And then obviously, probably the most boldest move, Hook is now back to being on the bench after being benched by Dallas Empire, picked up by LA Thieves, then benched again. He's now benched again, and TJ is now back off the bench. Who got benched? Who got benched for in the first place? TJ is now filling back into spot. So a lot of roster moves. That's half the teams in the CDL right now have made some sort of roster move. Um, at least one roster move since the start of the last major. So Brian, I'll go to you. Which one of these moves really sticks out to you? Some of these are kind of like Paris is like, yeah. Seattle is also kind of a yeah for me. But there's a couple ones here that could actually have some really big potential. Which one do you think is the biggest potential? Is the move that's gonna have the biggest potential here going forward?
I actually kind of like what Paris did, benching Classic for Zaptius. We only saw Zaptius for a brief period of time with London, but London looked very much improved at the end of stage three. So, in Classic, people talk about Classic as being a good, valuable player to Paris, and I think he has been, but like, I don't know. You don't know where his ceiling is. It's probably pretty low. I think Zaptius has a little more potential than him. So throwing him in there, I think could work out well. But I mean, Paris is in a rough spot. They've been bottom of the power rankings basically throughout the entire year. So that one's interesting to me. I think a couple were kind of obvious, like Minnesota benching Accuracy felt kind of inevitable. And I've talked about Minnesota the last couple podcasts being what I think to be the most overrated team in the league, and I think the results are finally starting to catch up with them, and people are starting to kind of buy into that. And yeah, Accuracy's numbers on the course of the entire year have been, towards the bottom if you're talking about just AR players. It's almost a surprise if you see him go above a 1.0 KD in a game. especially a hard point or a control. So getting Major Maniac in there, I think, helps a little bit, especially in Search and Destroy, which they've been struggling with a lot. So I like that move a little bit too. And then the other ones, obviously the Hook one is big. Now, when Hook first joined LA Thieves, I don't want to say I was down on the move because I wasn't. He's obviously an amazing player, but I think I was a little more cautious to say that LA Thieves were like a top 3 team as soon as that move happened because Hook's numbers had been falling off from stage 1. He was ridiculously good. He was arguably the best player in the league. Stage 2 comes around. He's still good, but not like a top 5 player, I would say. Like, he was still amazing, but he fell off a little bit. And you look at his numbers compared to TJ's across every game mode, and it's like, okay, Hook will for sure help in hardpoint. That was by far his best game mode. But the control, I don't know if you're getting much else out of him, and I actually thought it might hurt their search and destroy just because I feel like TJ's a better search player anyway, and when you bring in a new player, that generally hurts search and destroy the most just because it's all about X's and O's and timing and trading and all that, and um, team cohesion matters a little more. So I think all that kind of came true. What I'd love to see LA Thieves do, and I don't think they'll do it because nobody does it, is try out Hook in hardpoint or hardpoint and control, whatever you like there, and then throw TJ in search or search and control or whatever, but kind of sub them out mid-series. I know like nobody does that. I think Surge did it like once last year. I don't know if anyone else did, but I'd kind of like to see that just to see where it would go. But yeah, we'll see how they do with TJ back in the lineup. Again, I think it'll be good results, not great. They're kind of that middle of the pack team for me, but um, yeah, a lot of roster moves, and we'll see how it all shakes out. But very hard to keep track of. I do think we'll have less and less roster moves as we get into stage 5, just because teams want to kind of load up for champs. And then yeah, that whole thing is just, like you can't just keep cycling in guys before champ starts. So yeah, a lot going on, but I think I'm all caught up at this point.
Pretty much, yeah. I think I pretty much agree with pretty much everything. I kind of think Zaptius is a bit of an upgrade over Classic. And I mean, that London team was looking good. I don't think that London team's going to look substantially worse now, right? Like, a lot of it was Paul X and Shawnee. To me, kind of the biggest debate is, in that case, benching Zed for Alex. Alex wasn't doing the greatest. And now that he's back, we don't know if he's been practicing that much, right? So I think it's kind of iffy as to whether or not Alex is actually going to be that big of an upgrade over Zed. Zed was actually doing pretty okay. So I have high hopes for London. I think we'll talk about them in some matches pretty soon, but I think they could actually do pretty well. Um, Looking at something like Minnesota, yeah, I think this was the obvious choice. That being said, though, I don't think this is that big of an advantage. I mean, we were looking before. Major Maniac and Accuracy were both kind of the problems on that team before they got Standy. And then they got Standy, and then they benched Major Maniac, put Accuracy in, and then they received what seems to have been some sort of like um honeymoon bounce, right? And the thing is, then that faded kind of at the end of stage 3, and then definitely into stage 4. So they needed to do this, but I'm really iffy as to whether or not this is the thing that's going to put them back up there. I kind of would rather see that be another AR. Maybe if you could have gotten someone else from Challengers, maybe even like Methods there or something, that would have been a kind of better fit for that AR role. But I mean, yeah, I guess this, maybe they're trying this. I think if there's another team that would probably make a change after this, if Major Maniac doesn't work out, I think maybe that's when you could see something like a Methods there. I think that could make some sense. For LA Thieves, though, the thing is, LA was actually like they were on a roll. 4 of them, Kenny, Drazik, Venom, and TJ, they were on a roll after they made that team change, right? Like through the stage 3 major, they were looking great, and then into stage 3, they were also looking great too. Um, and they were on a roll, and then all of a sudden Hook came in, and then all of a sudden the team seemed to take a downturn, right? They lost their first game against, I believe it was New York, and then people were like, I mean, I myself was like, yeah, you know what? That's okay, right? I mean, they're still adjusting to the roles. They look pretty good. They lost some. It was like it was. I think they lost. I think it was 3-0 or 3-1. I can't remember exactly what it was. But a lot of it was like there was close games, there were some mistakes that they were making, and then that was the thing, and then they continued on to the major, and then they still didn't do so great, right? So I think this LA Thieves team might actually be really good now. I don't know, but the thing is, at this point though, if they're not good, then who can come right back, right? So that's an interesting thing to look at. We're gonna have to take a look at that in the future when we see it. The interesting one I'm looking at though is Dallas. Right now, the thing was, Fellow was actually not really the problem on the team. I personally thought that like kind of Crim6 and Illy were the problems. Fellow was actually doing like okay. He was not Shotzi level, but he was like the next best player on the team. So just benching him in exchange for Vivid, I don't really think that's gonna fix the problem. I'm not. I'm struggling to see the benefit of that move. I was kind of low on Dallas for. I've been low on Dallas for a little bit now, and this isn't going to change my opinion about Dallas. I don't really think that's going to really help them. What are your thoughts on the Dallas move? I think that's kind of the important one
Yeah,
going forward.
yeah. I can't believe I forgot to talk about Dallas a little bit, but I kind of like it actually. So I think with this team, like Shotzi and actually I think Krim are kind of locked into the lineup just with like Shotzi is their best player. Krim is like the leader. He's the vet. He's the main AR. It's hard to imagine him going anywhere else or on the bench. And then it comes to Illy and Fellow, and I think to me, it's just like Shotzi and Illy really like playing with each other. That's at least the vibe that I get from them is like even though Illy's numbers have been bad pretty much the entire year on an AR or on an SMG, like I think Shotzi and Illy team well together, and I think Krim likes that duo. So I think they tried Fellow, it didn't quite work. So and Illy on the SMG didn't look much better at all. So getting Vivid, I think a very fast player to play along with Shotzi. That honestly could be a pretty scary SMG duo if they can kind of gel together right away. And I think getting the better weapon in Illy's hands, the Krig, is a good move, and maybe he's more comfortable in that role, using an AR more of the time. But yeah, it's a wait and see for me. I do think I like this Dallas team more than I liked when they got rid of Hook, and that's easy to say because they got rid of Hook. But um, yeah, I don't know. There's so many moving parts, and it's so interesting, right? We're gonna see a lot of these teams that made roster moves go up against other teams that also made roster moves. So, it's this whole thing of like, if one of them wins, which one of them will, like we'll be like, oh, that roster move worked, and no, the losing teams didn't. And how do you weigh all that? The LA Thieves stuff from last stage, I know with Hook in the lineup they did struggle, but I think we're gonna look back on Group B in Stage 3 and just say like, oh my gosh, what a gauntlet of teams that was, with Atlanta, New York, LA Thieves, and Optic all in that. The other two were London, who looked improved, like not last place London, and then Seattle. So there's those two as well. But like LA Thieves going, I don't know, what was it, 1-3 with Hook in the lineup, something like that. Like, it's not good, but you kind of gotta expect that outcome might happen with that many good teams within the group. So, yeah, again, it's just a wait and see for me. I think we'll learn a lot after this first week, where these new rosters are at. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how stacked that group was. Looking at the groups now, the groups seem a lot more balanced, but I will say though that like the disrespect, because if you look here from the Call of Duty picture here, it shows the way they were picked, right? Because obviously Atlanta was first, and then obviously um New York were the top of each group, right? They were picking for that. It's very clear from this that Atlanta picked Toronto to go to Group B, and that New York then picked Optic to go to Group A. And then as you follow it down, most of this seems pretty good. This actually seems like a pretty standard layout. I mean, it appears as though the LEG was picked, then Paris was picked, which is questionable. I don't think that Paris, like the issue here is London. Like Dallas was picked way too high and London was picked way too low. I think that, I mean, maybe they just expected a mean reversion with Dallas, but basically picking Surge last is maybe not the best. I kind of think Paris is like slightly worse than Seattle, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
Like,
I agree for the most part. I think in terms of each group being like pretty well balanced, I do think they're formatted differently. Like Group A to me, which is um, FaZe, Chicago, LA Thieves, Minnesota, Seattle, and Paris. That to me is a more top heavy, bottom heavy group where it's like FaZe are like the number one team in the league. Chicago are very good. Thieves are pretty good, and we expect them to be good even with the roster change. And then it's like Rocker are we have no idea, like maybe middle of the pack, and then Surge and Paris are my 11 and 12.
yeah,
So how they got paired up in the same group, I don't know, but so that one's a little more clear cut, I'd say. And then you get over to Group B, that's a lot more like just all the teams in the middle are just bunched up: Toronto, New York, Dallas, Gorillas, Ravens, and Mutineers. That's a tough one to call for sure. I do think like Toronto and New York probably should start in winners bracket as long as nothing crazy happens.
I'd be very
And then
surprised if they weren't one and
yeah,
two
and
in
then it's
somewhere.
a battle for the 3 seed basically between the other four, I think. So
And I think, I mean, I could see
yeah,
either any of those getting it really. I think.
yeah, me too.
But to me, I think the thing that stands out for Group B for me is that like it's like Toronto, New York, 1 and 2. I mean, my model has Toronto slightly a bit above New York, which is fine. But it's like New York, Toronto, 1 and 2, and then there's a huge gap. Because like for me, for that group, the next best team on there is actually London. It's not even Dallas. It's the team that was picked last, and I've got about between New York and London, I've got like 20 some odd point, 20, 25-ish point elo gap between them. And then there's another 20 point elo gap between Toronto and New York. So like for me, it's like there's very clearly a top two, and then
Hmm.
everybody else is just kind of clustered there at the bottom. So I kind of view Group B as like it's like the really like there's the it's the golf group. It's like these are the top two teams, and then there's the rest of them are the bottom teams. But the thing is, they're actually fighting for a spot in winners bracket too. So that's my take on that group.
Yeah, definitely. I think Group B will be definitely the more interesting one to watch as we go through the weeks. But uh, I don't know if Rocker improve a lot, if Thieves look a lot better than they have the last few matches, then Group A could be a really spicy one too. So yeah.
Yeah. So all right. So now let's go and let's talk about the matches here. So one of the nice things about the way these groups are laid out now is that um, basically we know where the top matches are. And they did a really good job of scheduling the top matches to be like the last matches on the Saturdays and the Sundays, I think, for this group. So, like, we know that, like, the matches we're looking forward to, right? Obviously, when looking at the groups, it's like FaZe Chicago, Optic Thieves, Toronto, New York. Like, we know the group, we know the good matchups, right? And I think they did a really good job of scheduling that. So, some of these are kind of interesting. So the first one right off the bat, tomorrow. This one's happening in just under 24 hours. We've got Atlanta versus Paris. On Bet365, Atlanta has a giant money line price tag of -1,200, -1,200 the money line. Paris is +600. Atlanta FaZe, if you want the -1.5, it's a giant -400 as well. And Paris, the +1.5 is a +275. If you look at the alternative spreads, basically where the real spread is Atlanta FaZe -2.5 +100. Paris Legion +2.5 is -138. So basically, you're betting a -138 that Paris wins one of the first three map. Basically, they win one map out of the first three. Is basically what a -138 bets. That's a bad bet. My model also has this as Atlanta as a massive favorite, and it does have a 3-0 as the most likely outcome, but definitely nowhere near as likely as the betting markets. I've got Atlanta with about a 77% chance to win. What do you have this at? Like, this is just a massive price on this, and generally when we see such a giant price tag on a favorite in Call of Duty, generally we see some sort of upset. At least generally the +2.5 cashes. What do you think on that? Do you think there's some value at Paris, or are you just staying away from this game?
It's a total stay away from me, and yeah, our numbers disagree a lot here actually, and it probably is somewhere in between where I have it and where you have it, because right now I have Atlanta as a 95% chance to win. So Paris, it's not impossible. It's a 1 in 20 shot, but it's not looking good. To sweep, I have Atlanta at a 57% chance to sweep. So again, yeah, we both expect an Atlanta 3-0. With these sorts of series, though, it's so hard to tell because, again, I think we talked about it with the Toronto series in the last stage because they were perfect. And then I don't remember who exactly, I think Paris. They went up against Paris, and we were a little worried about, betting Toronto because they might try some new maps against Paris because they didn't really need the win. And I think they did try new maps, but I'm pretty sure they swept that series anyway. So you never know. Like I would expect maybe we see standoff for game 2 or maybe game 5, just because Atlanta probably wants to get reps on that. Now you're going against the worst search and destroy team in the league, so how much do you know? But any reps are good reps, I guess. So I think you see Atlanta try to pick maps that they are weaker at. So maybe Paris can sneak out one map victory here or there. Most likely it'd be in a hard point, so maybe game 1. But it's really hard to make a case for Paris, right? They made that roster move to get Zaptius, which I did like. But I just I don't see it happening. I think Atlanta FaZe want to start off the stage 1-0. Like this is just a series you can't lose. To Paris, you get Seattle down the road. Those are just like layups in my opinion. So to me, yeah, it's a stay away. If you want to bet this, I guess you can make a case for Atlanta -2.5 or Paris +2.5. I would rather go Atlanta -2.5, but um, yeah, I don't know. This is gonna be a bloodbath. If it's a 3-1, like I'll be happy because it means the series won't be over in 30 minutes. So yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like when you're sitting here at this, like you're like, oh well, Atlanta's a massive favorite. We should bet Paris +2 because we're such a good price on Paris to win one map, right? But like you have to bet Paris to win one map. Like, what map are they gonna win, right? Like,
yeah,
that's the thing when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, y'all, they can beat. It's like, oh, hardpoint. Well, they're not really good at hardpoint. Okay, well, search. Well, Atlanta's amazing at search, and then well, control. Well, also Paris is bad at control. So like, okay, sure, you're getting a good price on them to win one map, but like, what map, right? Like, maybe like if they play 10 maps, sure, but they're playing three, right? So
yeah. I think you gotta hope. Let me just look up Atlanta's map pool real quick. So, like Paris would have the best shot at hardpoint. It's their one game mode that they're like okay at. So if you get Atlanta on like a game 1 apocalypse or maybe even a checkmate, I think that would be okay for them. The search and destroys I worry about so much.
maybe
Unless you can get
that's
a yeah, search and destroy for Atlanta. Their one bad map is Express. They're 3-6 on. Everything else is pretty good. And then Control. They haven't played Checkmate that much, but like you're like it's just so hard to pick where they're gonna win if they are. So yeah, it's a stay away. It's just a classic. Just watch Atlanta sweep them and go about the rest of your day.
maybe that might be one way to actually bet this is the like because you can get spreads on search and destroy. So maybe like a -1.5 or -2.5 spread on a search and destroy. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, for Atlanta. Yeah, that might be the way, honestly.
There's no line on that yet, at least not on Bet365. Maybe on some other book. Let me check that quickly. But that might be a better way to do that. Let me. I'll check. While we're checking on another book, we'll do the next match here. So the next match is Toronto versus Florida on Bet365. Toronto is another pretty large, and I believe it's actually the next largest favorite for the entire week. Yeah, Toronto is a -450 on the money line, and Toronto and Florida is +300. Toronto -1.5 is -175. Florida +1.5 is +125. Um, I like Toronto in this. Toronto seem to have a really good matchup against Florida. Florida, the one time they had a choice about putting Toronto in a different group, and they deliberately did that because they're like, we hate playing against them. Um, I do not think that I do not think that this is like a good um I don't think this is a good like team. Like I do not think this Florida team is that great. I think they're kind of like they're definitely very middling. I have them as one of the worst teams. The fact that they beat like the only reason they lasted so long in champs and probably the only reason that there wasn't some sort of roster move was because they basically they upset Thieves, which they probably shouldn't have, to be honest. And then because of that, they were able to squeak through into the next round of the winners bracket, and then they just got destroyed by Optic, and then I think they got destroyed by someone else too. They
I
got
believe
just
I believe they started right. Winners round one is where they beat Thieves, and then they had to play New York and lost, and then got bounced down to losers, and then lost to Chicago as well. I think that's their path.
maybe it was losers. Oh yeah, oh that's right. Yeah, oh you're right. It was New York. It was New York. That's
Yeah.
right. It was New York, and then they got destroyed, and they had all these memes on Twitter about like, oh yeah, we didn't start today. Like shh, and then they play the next game, and then they also get destroyed. They get ground stomped by Optic, and it's not like Toronto is worse than those teams. Actually, my model thinks Toronto's a little bit better than those teams, and I mean, I'm not sure exactly what your model would think of that, but Toronto at least being on par with those teams. So
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I do have Toronto as my number two team in the league, despite New York's success in the last major and the last stage. And I think that those numbers you gave on the odds are about right. I do agree with you that if you are going to bet it, I think Toronto's probably the side you should go with. I have them favored in every game mode. Control is a big discrepancy. I have Toronto winning a control against Florida about 72% of the time.
that's
So
exactly what I have. That's we agree. We agree on
yeah,
it, man.
yeah. So unless the vetoes go weird and Toronto gets a bad control map because they want to again with these, really good teams against not so good teams, you worry a little bit about how the maps get picked just because we don't know how willing the good teams are to play on their bad maps. But if Toronto gets a good map set, I think a 3-0 is actually the most likely outcome in my model. 29% of the time that happens. Just behind that is a Toronto 3-1, which is 28% of the time. So we're probably going to see one of those. If Florida looks okay, I think a game five isn't crazy. It's not a totally unimaginable scenario, obviously. But yeah, talking about Florida and kind of the public perception behind them, I think it's kind of what Minnesota had at the end of the Major 2, where it's like they got a really good spot in winner's bracket. If we talk about Minnesota in Major 2, it was they got the first round bye because they got some tiebreakers going their right way. So they were the overall number one seed out of their group. They got bounced down to losers immediately, I think. Yeah. And then had that crazy series against Chicago to move on one more round and then lost again. So they finished 1-2, 1-2. And Florida kind of a similar path, not quite, but they start in winners round one. They get a good win, a quote unquote upset win versus LA Thieves. And then they go into winners round two, and New York puts them in their place. They go down to losers round, what would that be? Losers round four. They lose to Optic. So at the end of the day, their placement looks pretty good just because they started in winners and got one win out of that. So,
Yeah,
pump the brakes on Florida a little bit. I have them as the ninth best team in the league. I think the roster move for Havoc didn't really change much in terms of their prior stage performances to last stage. So yeah, I mean, it would surprise me a decent bit if Florida come out with the win, but I think it should be a much better match at least than Atlanta Paris. But both of these are pretty lopsided for considering everything going into them. So
yeah. We'll look at that and see. I don't know. I'm seeing that now on Betway. If you're on Betway, they have their Call of Duty esports boosts, and they are offering if it's a boost that says if Phase 3 O's Paris, you can bet plus 200 on that.
that's amazing. Like, yeah, Because I mean, I have that as like happening more than it not happening. Like it's over the
Yeah, I have
50%
that.
threshold. So that's
I
yeah,
might look. I might look. I might throw something on that. I don't think it's the most likely, but like if you're looking at other books, like I bet 365, the -2.5 is +100. So you're getting double the bet. Like that's not bad. Like even if it doesn't happen, you can feel like you feel happy. You go home and be happy.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so I might look at that. Anyways, so yeah, I think I might play Toronto, and the -1.5 is definitely not bad there. Moving on to Friday, Dallas versus London. Now, this is gonna be pretty interesting here. So the money Dallas is -250 on the money line. London is +175 on the money line. Dallas -1.5 is -110. London +1.5 is -125. I think the wrong team is definitely favored here. I do not know why Dallas is favored. I think it's because Dallas is Dallas. And people like London is bad, but like I don't know, maybe the books specifically they rank these on when teams were placed in the groups, but like this is a horrible price, on my opinion, for both the London money line and the London +1.5. What do you agree?
I agree. I'm not totally agreeing with the fact that Dallas shouldn't be the favored team. I do think Dallas should be favored. I have them 57% winning this series at. So a really close matchup considering the last two we talked about. And honestly, that number could be off by a lot because we don't know what these rosters are going to look. I mean, we know what they're going to look like. We don't know how they're going to perform, right? With Fellows subbing out for Vivid and then London swapping two players out for two new players. It is a little hard to keep track of. If you go just off of my model, London are a value bet even still, despite not being favored in my model. Like -250, you said for Dallas. That's way too high. It should be a lot closer to a 50-50 match. So this is a pretty easy London bet for me. I think you can get creative if you want to go money line. If you're feeling a little risky, I do think that's in play, but there's no harm in going just London plus a map and a half. So yeah, this is a pretty easy bet London or don't bet anything. Now, of course, Dallas. Here's the thing with Dallas is we've seen like go back to stage one and even stage two if you want. And we were talking about how that team had Hook, right? So it's hard to totally take everything from that to now. But those teams we were talking about, like Dallas was underperforming despite finishing second and then third in the next major after that. Like it still felt like they were like if they got everything clicking, they could like go up against FaZe. And now you bring in Vivid, maybe he can be close to what Hook was, and maybe if they don't underperform as much, then they can climb this mountain and get to, the Torontos and the Atlantas of the world. But at least right now, they're a middle of the pack team. London are close enough to the middle of the pack where you might as well just bet London if you're going to bet anything on this match. I think this should be a really good match, probably the best of the weekend, outside of like the premier match, like on Sunday. So, yeah, a good match, and Dallas is way overpriced.
Yeah. I will say that I have London at 54% chance to win. So I actually do have London favored. It might the fair price on that would be like -120, of course excluding the vig. But yeah, I mean I like London. I might actually bet London money line. We'll have to see. Um, Definitely though that +1.5, that's definitely going to find its way into some sort of parlay for me, like 100%. So that one's definitely value right there. So we'll see on that, and that we'll see where that ends up at some point. Now the other match for Friday is this. This could be a little tricky, I guess. So it's Optic versus Minnesota. Optic -334 on the money line. Minnesota +240. Optic -1.5, -138. Minnesota +1.5. That's actually ballooned up to +100. Um, I have I have Optic winning this about 60-40, but I will note that Minnesota has done well after team changes. Could be a bit of a honeymoon effect here. Optic played kind of out of their minds coming towards the end of stage 4, even though they had kind of struggled during stage four, like during stage four groups, they struggled, but or sorry, during stage three groups they struggled, but during stage three playoffs they did really well. What are your thoughts here? Do you think it's just chalk up Optic win, or do you think maybe Minnesota can make this close? Maybe that plus 1.5, or maybe even that money line isn't the worst idea.
Yeah, I have a 70-30 match with this going in favor of Chicago. So the prices are about right. We talk about Chicago minus a map and a half, Minnesota plus a map and a half. I have that as basically a 50-50 split. So Chicago winning in 3 maps or 4, about the same amount of times as Chicago winning in 5 or Minnesota winning in any way, shape, or form. So um, yeah, it's tough with Chicago. I think just because you talked a little bit about Chicago in the group play, maybe not as good, and then they come into playoffs and rip off a few and look really good. Again, I think that's just mostly due to their group. Like we talk about Atlanta, New York, Chicago, and LA Thieves all in the same group. It's like, well, one of those teams has to finish last of those 4. Chicago ended up being that team, and I don't think it was like I don't think they were playing poorly. I think they just were losing games, and that happens. And then you get to losers bracket in the major, you get a little more favorable schedule, having to play like LA Gorillas and I believe London, like just easier teams than those other 3. So I think that's part of the reason why we saw that run. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It should be a good matchup just considering I think the last time we saw these teams was in Major 2 when Chicago lined up on Moscow S&D and Accuracy clutched it up. Now Accuracy isn't playing in the series, so that can't happen again. Knock on wood, but yeah, we'll see. I think it should be a good series. My problem with Minnesota and why I have them only winning the series about 30% of the time is just their narrow path to victory. It's pretty much for the entire year, outside of a few matches with Standy when he first came in, their path to winning is game 2, game 3, game 5, and that's going to have to be how they do it against Chicago, which will be tough considering that Chicago has been improving in Search and Destroy, that game 2 and game 5. Control is a bit of a toss-up. That's where Minnesota, I'd say, does their best work. They're a pretty scrappy control team, and they have been all year. But you talk about hardpoint, that's probably got to go Chicago's way. And Search and Destroy, I do lean Chicago as well. So it's going to be tough for Minnesota. Is it possible? Absolutely. But, we'll see. Major Maniac, if anything, he's going to help them in Search. So again, we talk about how are you going to win, Minnesota? You got to go 2-3-5. It's if they win a game 1 hardpoint or a game 4 hardpoint, it's going to be probably pretty close. But I think Chicago will be ready, and I think they do get it done probably in a 3-1 fashion.
Yeah, that's generally what I'm leaning towards as well. I think if you do that minus 1.5 might not be the worst. You'd be scared though, right? Because it's like if they make a change and suddenly, but remember it is still the same core of the team, right? Like if you basically make the assumption that like Accuracy and Major Maniac are like roughly the same, then like I don't see this team getting that much better. Now this would be kind of interesting to look at kind of this challenger stats for Major Maniac and seeing how he's been doing in challengers as to whether or not they just brought him up because they just had no one else to bring up, or whether or not they're like actually like no, he's actually been doing really well. We'll play him, right? So that's kind of an interesting angle on it. So we'll have to see about that. This could be kind of a close game, but I kind of lean towards Optic just kind of crushing them in that. Next one up, Saturday. So the very Minnesota plays the very next game. That's kind of unusual. Minnesota minus 250 on the money line against Paris, which is at plus 175. Very similar price to the Dallas London game. Minnesota minus 1.5 is plus 100. Paris plus 1.5 is minus 138. Give me Paris. Give me Paris here. This is the thing, right? Like if we're on the whole thing where we're like we don't like Minnesota and we think that Minnesota's kind of this bottom tier team, and if we don't see anything from this Optic game, like give me Minnesota. Like sorry, give me Paris here because like Paris will need to make a comeback. They'll have just gotten like 3-0'd, maybe 3-1'd by FaZe after the team change after adding Zaptius. Like I don't know. We'll have to see how it all looks like, especially if they do something against Atlanta. Then definitely putting Paris here. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree pretty strongly with you. I do have this right now being a Minnesota 66.7 if we want to go to decimals. So about a exactly 2/3 chance of winning this, just because I have Minnesota kind of in the tier above Paris. Right now, Paris and Seattle for me are like the bottom of the barrel teams, and then Minnesota's kind of in that next group up of like they're not really contenders. They're just kind of fine. So there is a bit of a gap, but in terms of like betting, assuming both of these teams lose and assuming Paris gets absolutely destroyed by Atlanta, which will probably happen, um, I think people will make the argument like, well, Minnesota lost to Chicago, and Chicago showed they're getting real hot, especially at the end of last major into this one. Like, and people are going to go, oh yeah, Paris, they're just not good. But like, let's slow down. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Minnesota shouldn't be crazy big favorites against anyone, probably. So, and again, their path to victory is narrow when you're, so bad at one game mode, especially hardpoint or especially search. Like, you kind of only have one path at winning. Now, I will say Paris is beatable in hardpoint, so Minnesota could sweep them. Anything can happen. That's the thing with COD. Anything can happen, but a Minnesota 3-2 is what I have as the most likely scenario. And if Paris improve a little bit in search and destroy, it wouldn't shock me to see them win in a game 5. Now, again, we talk about Paris is the worst search team by far, and you're adding a new player. Does that help or hurt you in search? It usually hurts, but like it's hard to imagine Paris getting worse. So I'll be interested in seeing how this one goes. I do have Minnesota 3-2, but just wait on betting this one until both of their first games end. And then I think you do get some pretty good value on Paris, either money line or plus a map and a half. I actually think plus a map and a half might be the way to go, but either way, I think is a valuable bet.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make on that too, right? Paris gets 3-0'd by Atlanta, then that money, then Paris plus 1.5 might actually go to plus money, right? So, um, lots of potential options to bet this, especially after. So maybe you might want to bet this on Friday night, probably before the market moves on from Friday to Saturday, but probably after that Optic game, you're probably going to want to bet this match right then. Next one up, Thieves versus Surge. Thieves are minus 450 on the money line. That's a big price. Seattle Surge is plus 300. Thieves minus 1.5 is minus 188. Seattle plus 1.5 is plus 137. Why is this only minus 188? That feel like for the minus 1.5 feels like it should be bigger. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's tough. I actually think there might be a hair, like the thinnest amount of value on Seattle. Um, but it's tough because again, whenever we talk about Seattle, we talk about how horrible they are at control, and like everyone knows that by now. So you kind of give LA Thieves the control win, assuming they don't play Garrison Control, which is Seattle's only decent map. I gotta look up Seattle's records on control maps because it's the funniest thing in the league, I think. So Seattle on the year in control, they're 3-16. That's a 15.8% win rate. They're 0-3 on checkmate. 0-7 on raid, so 0-10 combined on those two, and they're 3-6 on Garrison. So like their best map by far is Garrison, and they're winning a third of their games on that. It's so bad. I don't think any team the last 2 years since the CDL has started has had a game mode as bad as Seattle's control is. But I do think Seattle can at least compete in hardpoint and in search. Now, I don't have them favored in either game mode, but if they get a decent map set, I think it is possible to maybe upset LA Thieves in 5. If they do it in 3 or 4, I would be absolutely shocked. But I don't know. It's a tricky one for me. This is going to be Seattle's only match of the week, correct? Yeah. So coming off a team change, bringing in Classic, I don't think it's a phenomenal move, but it's something. Um, and we'll see how Thieves do in their first match, but I don't know. This one just is a little tough for me. There's something weird about it that makes me not want to bet it. I do think there will be value on one side or the other depending on how that first Thieves match goes, but right now it's just tough for me to forecast how this one's going to play out.
Thieves actually doesn't play earlier. That they don't. That's their first game as well.
Really? Oh yeah,
Because
I stand corrected. So this is just a no bet for me because I have no idea how it's going to go. I
yeah,
obviously think Thieves should win, but I don't know. There's something in the water with Seattle. No, or pun intended. Sure, we'll go with
give them the pun. No, I mean I kind of agree with that, right? I mean Thieves. Probably the reason why that price is so low is because Thieves have kind of really sucked since they added Hook, right? So Hook is gone. Do they go back to not sucking? Did getting rid of TJ and then like did that change? Like did getting rid of TJ, putting in Hook, and then now putting back TJ, did that mess up some sort of chemistry on the team, right? And is it the fact that now maybe they're like, okay, we're playing for this team, but this team doesn't really have loyalty to us because if they're like if they see a better player, they're just gonna go after that better player, right? So that can start messing with a team that way, right? So it might not be that much of a lock because I'm thinking about this now. It might not be as big of a lock as I thought it was. I don't know. Seattle, they added classic. The thing was Decimate was pretty good and that didn't help. It's basically they got rid of Looney and then Pristini and Gunless sucked. So like I don't know if that was the like if
the
Octane
thing with Decimate. So I get that he didn't play that poorly and like he left on his own, but just watching their games with Decimate, like it shows the player cams right afterwards. And it felt like Decimate and someone else on the team. It might have been Pristini, it might have been Octane, might have been Gunless. Like it felt like he was always in an argument every time they lost. Like you could see them going back and forth talking about something that went wrong on the map. So I think there was just a lot of toxicity going on with Decimate on the roster, even though he was performing at least adequately. So I think you bring in Classic, you're just hoping for like slightly better team chemistry, slightly better vibes, I guess. I don't think there's a lot of like skill improvement, like like shooting, but I don't know. You see roster changes help a lot. This one might be that, but again, LA Thieves, they might go back to TJ and they might look better too. It's just it's a stay away from me, but I wouldn't be super shocked if Seattle ended up winning in 5 games maybe. So
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, they have to win some games sometime, right? I mean, this is kind of the point where we saw half the teams make a change, right? In Seattle, in their kind of promotional trailer for the move, they basically said, our goal is to make it to champs." And the thing is, now that they've added that cutoff of like you have to get top 8 to get to champs, now there's pressure on those bottom 4 teams, and Seattle is definitely one of those bottom 4 teams, right? So like the pressure is on Seattle to do something and to get that win. LA Thieves probably going to champs, right? They're pretty high up there on the standings. They always seem to do pretty well. They do seem to do okay every major pretty much. So they're there. So they're gonna probably make it to champs. Seattle is they need to be like insanely good. Can they be insanely good? I mean, beating Thieves, getting a win against Thieves would be a huge help to that, and it's possible they could take them to 5, right? Seattle's searches have been okay, but the maybe the hard points. Maybe I'll go back and take a look at some of those Seattle games against some of those teams just to see kind of what happened, and I'll go back and think about that. But there's something to look at. Next up, the last game on Saturday night. The Saturday night closest we get to prime time with CDL this year. New York Subliners versus LAG. Subliners minus 350 on the money line. LAG plus 250. Subliners minus 1.5, minus 163. LAG plus 1.5, plus 120. I believe currently, I'm just going to double check this. I think LAG is going to champs currently. I believe.
I think they're just on the outside. I could be wrong though. I want to say they're ninth.
Let me just check.
I want to
But
say Florida 8, LAG 9, but I could be wrong.
CDL Intel's Twitter feed is extremely, extremely useful. So shout out to them there. They have the best kind of information for when you're looking for something here. Let me just. I mean, the thing is, there is kind of a close battle there. Um, as I'm just trying to find this here, the one thing that I like is the fact that they have. Yeah, here we go. They are just on the outs. Yeah, they're 30 points out from Florida. So they're not out of it yet. But then again, you look at Surge, and Surge is 70 points back of Florida, right? And then that being said, only 80 points back of Minnesota. But um, like that's a lot of ground to have to make up. Um, LAG it's doable. Ravens definitely doable. But Paris, you're so far back. Seattle, you're already so far back as well. It's tough. Thieves are six. They're 170, so they got a 40-ish point lead over Minnesota, 50-point lead over Florida. So they actually have some clearance there. Um, the one thing I love is that Toronto has 225 and Dallas has 230. The five coming from the 75 points you win from winning a major. So the way I like to view is Toronto is nominally in fourth place. They're actually basically in third place because once they play Dallas, they probably should beat Dallas and fully get to third place. But the one thing I wonder about this, like, will we be able to figure out when someone's clinched a spot in champs? Because like I think if FaZe has to be close, like they're probably gonna win one random game and then be like, cool, you've made it to champs now.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. The like CDL number cruncher guys, I'm sure will probably start doing that. I would imagine at the end of this stage, going into stage 5. I think there's just so many scenarios to play out that they don't want to. We're a stage early for that, I think. But I mean, at this point, yeah, we know Atlanta's in there, and Toronto, and New York, and we have a good idea that like 6 or 7 of those top teams should stay. It's a matter of the eighth spot, with Minnesota, with LAG, with Florida. It's probably one of those three, but it should be a good race for the eighth, in my opinion. And we talk about this LAG New York game. It's I don't want to say it's not a big game for either team, but it's maybe bigger for New York because I'm thinking of right LAG's big matches for their group, right, are going to be especially Florida. They're right next to Florida in terms of CDL points. So Florida's a big one that you kind of need to win. And then you think you can beat Dallas, probably. You think you could beat London. And then there's Toronto and New York. We kind of put in a class above the rest of Group B. So if you get this win, if LAG gets this win over New York, I think it's very nice, but it's not totally needed. I think if you're New York and you're competing with Toronto for, the number one overall seed, I think you gotta kind of go perfect in this group, or at least go like 4-1, but beat Toronto, or if you're Toronto, beat New York. So a pretty big game, all things considered, especially for New York. And I actually do have this being a little closer than most might expect. I have this as a 60-40 game, largely due to the fact that Gorillas are still one of the best search teams in the league, and New York are a little troublesome in that game mode. We've seen New York's control not be great recently. Now LAG's control also not great, so we'll see how that goes. But then obviously hardpoint, big advantage to New York. So if New York wins, should be a 3-1. If LAG wins, should be a 3-2. But I think this series might surprise some people. My model has loved LAG since the beginning of the year, basically. And yeah, don't be shocked if LAG win this. But I do think in the end, New York probably pull it out, especially with the momentum they've gained since last major. Bringing in Hydra, he's been an absolute maniac. And yeah, Max in a more comfortable role on the AR, I think. Clayster's improved. Asim's still doing his thing. Yeah, this team's scary. I think they could eventually take over Toronto as the number 2 team in my power rankings if, a big if, they can clean up their search and destroy and or their control. But right now, you talk about hardpoint teams, New York are kind of the team to beat, in my opinion.
I think New York is the best. I think I have New York as I have New York as the number one hardpoint team. Um, New York is number one. Atlanta is number two. Toronto is number four for hardpoint. So definitely an issue for hardpoint. It's weird. Toronto is like the fourth best second hardpoint team, but they're the seventh best first hardpoint team. So it's very weird. but they seem to do they lose pretty much every game on hard point. It's actually kind of hilarious. But anyway, so yeah, no, there's some definite. I mean, we'll have to see. The thing is, it's just like every time we say this, like we're like we see value on LAG, and then they play the game out, and then all of a sudden, like LAG gets destroyed, like against Optic, like when they 3-1 LAG, right? And like, I mean, I think I do have Optic as a better team than Subliners at this moment, but like, it's hard to always keep um, it's hard to just keep always justifying betting on LAG, especially I mean, the plus 1.5 at plus 120 is attractive, but like, it's hard to keep saying, yeah, okay, let's try it. It's just like, it just seems every time we say to do it, it falls in our face, and it's not fun. But I mean,
Yeah,
again,
it's tough. They've been on the bad side of a lot of Game 5 losses, and I think if they keep getting there, they should start winning those. But yeah, we see a lot of losses with them lately, and it's tough to justify all that. But I still believe. I know they're a bunch of
I
old guys, and no one likes them, and they want to see more roster changes. And why the hell did they bench Vivid and blah 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 blah. I think this team has a shot to go to champs, and I think their match versus Florida, whenever that is, that could be huge in terms of CDL points and if they can get to champs. So we'll wait a week or two on that one. I'm not sure exactly when
Yeah.
that is, but
Well,
that'll be spicy.
if Toronto beats Florida and LAG beats New York, then they're already one step closer. Then they're already down to 20 points. So, um, that's they're getting closer there. Actually, I'm just thinking, it's like the thing is, I think I'm not sure. You have some simulations that you run. I haven't built simulations of like for future games into my model yet. You got to run this. I think FaZe is clinched. They have a 100-point lead over the Subliners. They're at 340 points. A team that's in eighth is 120 points. Like, even if FaZe lost every game from now on, I don't think you could catch them.
Well, yeah, I mean, you'd have to do the scenario of like, yeah, FaZe don't get any more points throughout the year, which that's not going to happen.
And then you have to get
But
into weird
like,
situations where like
the,
Ravens, Paris, and
and then
Seattle also get no points.
yeah, but it'd be like, well, imagine a FaZe don't win a series for the rest of the year, and then whoever's the number 9 seed, I think it's Gorillas. Imagine Gorillas win every series for the rest of the year. Like,
No, I get that,
maybe
but
maybe
even
the
then,
math adds up, but
no, but even
I don't
then,
know.
no, I agree with that point, right? So like, okay, fine, you could theoretically, because it's 75 points to win a major, and then you have another 50 points on that, so 75 by 2 is, let's just run the math on this. 75 by 2, and then plus another 100. So that's 250 points plus 90 is 340. So they'd be exactly tied.
Okay, well then it's close. It's
Well,
super
then,
close.
no, but the thing is, even if LEG won all those, then Florida still would have to overtake FaZe as well. Right? Like, it's more than just, okay, can the place team overtake FaZe? It's can the eighth place team also overtake FaZe while the ninth place team
True, true,
overtakes
true,
FaZe.
true. Yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
You're
they've
right.
clinched. Like, I
I
think
mean, yeah, they have to have by now. It's like, and they're not gonna lose out, and yeah. So yes, I mean
so.
you
Then
can
fine, okay. So
honestly
then if they
maybe
beat
just pencil them in as the number 1 seed at this point. Like they're they're a cut above the rest in my opinion,
no,
but
100%. Okay, so then
we'll
fine. Then
see.
if they beat Paris tomorrow, we will tweet out that we believe LeanTossup believes that FaZe has officially clinched a spot in champs.
Yeah, go ahead. I
Or
mean,
they
I
probably
don't
have
think
now.
that's gonna surprise a lot of people, but
No,
yeah, I
like
think that could be right.
breaking news. Atlanta FaZe is good. Okay, moving on to Sunday now, the last day of the week for the matches. Florida versus London. Again, London, the disrespect. Florida minus 175 on the money line. London plus 125. Florida minus 1.5 plus 125. London plus 1.5 minus 175. Yeah, I got London here.
Me too. It's and this is one where I do have London favored over Florida. It's basically a toss up. I have them back to back in my power rankings. London 8th. London I have winning 53% of the time, most likely in 4 maps. And if Florida wins, it's probably going to be in 5. London slightly favored in hardpoint and control, slight underdogs in search and destroy. You add all that up, London should be a slight favorite overall. So, yeah, I don't know. I think we have to weigh, right. It's a big roster move for London, and that's maybe why the price is so off from what we have. Uh, I think Alec. People I think are just overestimating the overall like plus minus of what it does though. Like I think Afro could be like super good. Like I
Yeah,
don't want to say he could be Hydra, but like I've heard that Afro is very good and he plays in Europe and all that stuff and he's finally coming over. And then I think you compare Alex with like Zed and it's like could they be at least close to the same level? Like yeah, I think Alex maybe plays a little faster and that maybe can be a detriment at times, but overall, I think their roster, keeping Paul X, keeping Shawnee, those guys have been pretty steady for you. I don't think the other two make a drastic difference one way or the other. So, all things considered, London should be slight favorites over Florida. So, another bettable spot for them,
yeah.
especially if they lose their first match.
Oh, definitely. If they lose their first match, then just everything on London. Um,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
not not everything. We're joking, but like something on London. Toronto Dallas. That's the afternoon game. Toronto minus 250 on the money line. Dallas plus 175. Toronto minus 1.5 plus 100. Dallas plus 1.5 minus 138. I almost want to bet Toronto minus 1.5 now because if Dallas beats Florida or whoever they're playing, if Dallas beats London, well, if London beats Dallas, then that plus one, then that plus 100 on the minus 1.5 is gone. But if Dallas beats London, then that goes to like plus 150, maybe, or like plus 120, right? So like it's definitely a bettable spot for Toronto. I really like Toronto over Dallas. I mean, it's really going to depend on what they show us in that London game at this point, whether or not to bet Toronto in this game or not. Is that your opinion as well?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you there. Just looking at the stats, like game by game, Toronto and Dallas, you talk about hard point. These teams are like super close, and I think that should stay put even with Vivid getting added to Dallas. So if it does go 4 games, you probably see both teams split game 1 and game 4. Whoever picked which map probably wins. So there's that. But then you talk about search, you talk about control. Toronto are if COD was just search and destroy and control, there's a case to be made that Toronto would be the best team in the league. Um, Not saying they're bad at hardpoint. I'm just saying they're freakishly good at search and control. So all that adds up to a Toronto win about 68% of the time. So it's not unimaginable to see Dallas win, but I think Toronto are the better team. Um, they have the better team chemistry. They've been together the entire year, minus with when they had methods, but we don't talk about that, I guess. But
We don't talk about that now.
yeah, but yeah, I think Toronto win. Now, this is actually really interesting in terms of will they do it in 3, 4, or 5 maps? Um, I have basically every scenario tied. If you talk about Toronto winning in 3, I have 22%. 22% also for them in 4 maps, and then I have it 24% in 5 maps. So I do think this probably goes to a map 5, and probably goes Toronto's way just because we talk about how good they are at search. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if Dallas put up a really good fight against them. We've seen them go head to head earlier this year, and for the most part, they've been decent matches, I think. So yeah, I get why this game is on Sunday. It's a big one in terms of seeding, right? We talk about New York and Toronto being the class of Group B. Uh, you really can't stumble if you're one of those two teams until you go against the other one. So I don't want to say must win for Toronto, but it has similar vibes to that LAG New York match where like it'd be really nice if Dallas can win. It'd be really nice if LAG can win, but not totally needed. I'd say the pressure's maybe more so on the favorited team, but we'll see. Upsets happen. If Dallas looks good with Vivid, this could be an upset, and the line could drop a lot. If that is the case, then I think Toronto is very bettable, but we'll see how that all shakes out prior to Sunday. So
Yeah, that's actually a good point you made about Toronto with if COD was only search and control. Um, Basically, when Atlanta beat Toronto in that control at the end of the losers bracket final, that was the first control loss, and it was like 12, like 13 controls or something. And if they don't lose that, I mean, we don't know what would happen, but then if we assume the rest of the series happened the same way, Toronto wins the hard point, then Toronto is going up against New York in the finals, and they could have won this. They could have won that again, right? So, and the thing is, this is the thing, 'cause I touted on Twitter, Toronto plus 600 to win it all, for to win the tournament on early Sunday, which actually came close to happening, right? 'Cause I mean, they basically opted to get better against Toronto than we thought they were going to. So that was kind of a bit of a derailment on that. But then at the same point though, um, that's when Toronto took phase the distance pretty much. I mean, they kind of the gas fell out. They kind of ran out of gas there in the search and destroy. But again, if they win that control instead, um, or did they win the search, then like that, and then Toronto probably might have been favored over New York, depending on how that worked. So, yeah, it was Toronto is a good team, and betting against this Toronto team is not something you want to do. The only team that seems to be able to constantly beat this Toronto team is Atlanta, and even then they constantly go to fives. So I'm gonna say that like and the interesting game, I think the game for the entire stage for me, there's a couple of games. One of them is the one we're gonna talk about next, but the other one for me is Toronto versus New York, which I believe is next week. Or no, it's actually no, it's not. It's actually it's the week after that. It's actually the last week, I believe.
Think
Uh
I would imagine that would be the last week.
I think it's the second last game actually. I think.
Yes. Yep, you're correct.
It's the second last game, yeah. Which is unfortunate they have to wait that long. Which also then another game, which should be a good game, Optic versus Thieves. So that last week is gonna be fun. But no, like those two games are the kind of the most important games for me. And I really want to see how Toronto faces against New York, which kind of be like a preview of or showcase of what could have been that major three final. Last match of the week: FaZe versus Chicago. FaZe minus
Woo!
300. Huh?
Hot. It's gonna be hot. This one.
Yeah, FaZe 300 on the money line. Optic plus 225 on the money line. FaZe minus 1.5, minus 138. Optic plus 1.5, plus 100. Give me Optic. There's no fun betting
Mm.
on FaZe. Give me Optic. Give me the.
I okay. I'll make the case for FaZe. I get the case for Chicago. I think is that right. FaZe are this team. They're on a roll. They're the team to bet against because right now they're at the top and everyone wants to take them out. Like yes, I get that, and maybe you'll argue something else. But right now, Atlanta FaZe are just they're on a whole nother tier. And there might even be a tier of like nothing in between them and team number 2, which would be Toronto. But okay, the one thing I'll say about Chicago is they played in a game 5 or a 5-game series earlier this year. It did go to a game 5. Chicago almost beat them in a game 4. Moscow hardpoint they kind of threw, and then Atlanta took them out in search, and you know it. Chicago is a good team, no doubt, but I just with Atlanta, they're nuts. They're honestly so good that I am terrified betting against them. Now, I will say if you want to bet like map specific games, like Chicago over Atlanta, if we get the map set early, I think that could be a spot to kind of pick and choose where you want to go with Optic. But honestly, Atlanta minus a map and a half, I know you got to lay some juice with it, but I don't hate it. And if Chicago look okay versus Minnesota, we might get some Optic money coming in, and that might lower Atlanta's price. But obviously, we're a long ways away from this game, but my early lean is Atlanta. Make a case for Chicago.
I mean, one, it's kind of that revenge spot back for that game, right? It's crazy that they haven't played in like two stages. Um, like Optic has a habit of taking the top teams to the distance, right? I mean, they did that against Toronto in the major. They took it to 5. So like I definitely would probably invest more heavily on the Optic plus 1.5 than Optic outright. Maybe a little sprinkled on the Optic outright. And I'm just thinking about this now. This may actually be we might now get um Optic versus Minnesota. That might be a look ahead. That might be a look ahead spot for Optic against that Minnesota team earlier in the week. If they're thinking about FaZe and they're not planning for Minnesota. I'm not sure if we have. I'm not like usually that's more a football thing when they look ahead to next week's matchup. Not so much for Call of Duty, but that could maybe happen. But no, I don't hate this optic team. I like this optic team. I think I like trying to bet against FaZe sometimes, probably more than I should. Um, but I don't know. This optics team just seems they seem to be clicking now. I don't know. It's weird to say that we're gonna bet optic against FaZe, but then not bet optic against Minnesota. I don't know. I just give me a dog. Just give me an underdog.
Fair
Let's
enough, fair
let's
enough.
just
I'm
let's
never gonna
see.
hate on betting an underdog.
Nah, I mean it could happen, right? And it's not like I think this line is just a bit too much juice. I think people are like FaZe is the best team ever. Watch this line change though. Like if Optic destroys Minnesota, this line is suddenly Optic plus 150. At that point, the value's gone.
That's what gets scary, right? If Atlanta crush Paris and then Chicago come out and beat Minnesota in 3 or maybe even 4, like I think the narrative going into this match all of a sudden becomes Chicago is right there with Atlanta, and like I just don't think that's the case. But obviously they could win, anything can happen, but it's going to be a heck of a match, and like I might miss it. I might be out of town or I might be traveling at this time, so I might have to watch it after the fact, but whew, I am looking forward to this very much.
Yeah,
So
I don't know. All I know is that I just don't want to be holding a phase minus 1.5 ticket on this match. I'd be okay with phase money line, but like if you're not gonna bet phase minus 1.5, Optic just has a habit of taking teams to 5, especially the top teams. Maybe they play up and down to different competition. I don't know, but we'll see. Could be interesting there. Um, I don't know. Let's that's gonna be a good game at least on the Sunday night. Definitely looking at the plus 1.5. Might sprinkle a little on that money line. We'll have to see. But anyways, that should do it for us for this week. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on as always. It's a pleasure talking COD with you and talking about all these roster moves and different maps and lines and it's always fun. Thank you for coming.
yeah, not a problem. Thank you for having me. And yeah, we'll see how all these roster moves shake out for better or for worse. And yeah, I'm curious to see if any teams make a change after this week because, whew, that's going to be a lot to keep track of if so.
All right, one more quick prediction then. Do we see standoff a lot this weekend or not? Yes, no.
I think so. Going back, I think we did see a lot of, at least with Express when Express came into the S&D pool. I remember we saw it a lot in that first week. Apocalypse, not so much, but that's with hard points, so I don't want to go apples to apples with that. But I do think we see a fair amount of standoff, and honestly, I hope it's in the Chicago Atlanta series at least. But what do we have? 10 matches. We maybe see standoff. I'd say in maybe half of them, 5 out of 10. I'd be happy with that.
That'd be nice, yeah. I mean, I think when you're looking at probably Atlanta and Optic, they're probably well. That's the thing, right? If they've worked on strats for it, if Atlanta's worked on strats for it, they'd probably be smart to veto it against Paris to hold on for Optic. That'd be like next level move. Um, but like for teams that either sucked at checkmate or were really good at checkmate, they might want to like look at it and be like, hey, okay, we want a new map. This is now new checkmate. Let's see if we can let's see if we can get better. Let's see if we can get a new map for us, right? In the map pool, right? So and I think Toronto is going to be at a point now where especially in some of these earlier matchups when 'cause again the way we view the tables, right? Like there's the top tier and then there's the bottom tier in that in group B. It's very top heavy with Toronto, New York in the bottom tier. If they're smart, they've realized what Atlanta's I mean, obviously, I'm sure they realize what Atlanta's been doing with picking different teams, with different maps, sorry, against different teams to try and expand that map pool. And if Toronto is really a serious competitor, which they seem to be, then they should probably start trying to expand that map pool as well. So I expect Toronto to start picking up stuff like maybe picking Apocalypse, maybe picking up Standoff here and there. They weren't great at checkmate. They're actually really bad at checkmate. I think their checkmate control isn't horrible either. So, um, we'll have to see. I don't know. It could be pretty interesting to see what Toronto does or doesn't do in the next stage. And I'm really excited to see, because our theory of the case of like there's a definite tier one of teams, then there's like a tier two, and then a lower tier. I'm interested to see if we're right on that, if like there's massive upsets, or if some teams start breaking through. So, yeah, it's gonna be a really good week, and I'm excited to get back and watching some COD this week. So, anyways, so thank you everybody for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.